Welcome to Cozy Mystery Stories, where secrets fester under the most genteel of veneers. Our tale unfolds at the Elysian Fields Country Club in Palm Beach, Florida, a manicured Eden for the fabulously wealthy and retired. Here, amidst sprawling golf greens and hushed whispers over cocktails, a conspiracy takes root. When a brutish newcomer threatens to expose the rot beneath the polished surface, the members find themselves trapped by a looming hurricane, forced to confront a killer in their midst. Chapter 1. But my dear reader, the truth is often disguised in the ordinary, and there is nowhere more deceptively ordinary than a country club in Palm Beach. The Elysian Fields Country Club was a monument to cultivated tranquility, a place where old money came to bask in the twilight of its years, shielded from the vulgarities of the modern world by acres of immaculate Bermuda grass and walls of flowering hibiscus. The air, thick with the scent of salt and gardenias, carried the gentle, rhythmic thwack of a golf ball perfectly struck, a sound as soothing and predictable as the tides. It was, in short, a place where nothing was ever supposed to happen, which is precisely why, of course, something did. The catalyst for discord arrived, as it so often does, in the form of new money. Mr. Silas Blackwood was a man carved from a coarser stone than the polished marble of Elysian Fields. He was loud where its members were quiet, ostentatious where they were discreet. He had clawed his way to a fortune in some unsavory corner of the financial world. Commodities, I believe, a word that always sounds so dreadfully grubby, and had bought his way into the club, much to the collective, though politely suppress. Horror of the establishment. He treated the golf course like a personal fiefdom and the clubhouse like a tavern, his booming laughter echoing off the cypress-panelled walls, shattering the carefully curated peace. He was, to put it plainly, a cad, and he was, as of this afternoon, quite thoroughly dead. He lay near the infamous water hazard of the 18th hole, a spot affectionately known as the Financier's Folly, a name that had acquired a rather grim irony. His garish mustard-yellow trousers were sullied with grass stains, and his face, usually flushed with brutish confidence, was now a placid, waxy mask. The cause of his demise appeared to be a rather significant disagreement with the back of his own skull, which had met with a blunt object of considerable force. Observing the scene from a respectful distance stood a small, incongruous group, huddled together like sheep expecting a wolf. They were trapped, you see, not merely by the grim tableau before them, but by the heavens themselves. A hurricane, a tempestuous lady named Isadora, who had been flirting with the Florida coastline for days, had finally decided to make her grand entrance. The sky had turned a bruised purple-grey, and the palm trees, usually so placidly elegant, were whipping themselves into a frenzy. The bridges to the mainland were closed. The power lines were down. The Elysian Fields Country Club, that bastion of leisurely escape, had become a prison. Among the unwilling inmates was Justice Alastair Finch, retired from the High Court of England, a man whose mind was as sharp as the crease in his linen trousers. He was a guest of Dr. Arthur Pendleton, the club's resident physician, a man who perpetually looked as though he had just misplaced his spectacles or, perhaps, his moral compass. Justice Finch surveyed the scene not with the ghoulish curiosity of the others, but with a quiet, professional interest. The little grey cells, as one of my dear Belgian friends is so fond of saying, were already at work. A dreadful business, Alastair, dreadful, Dr. Pendleton muttered, dabbing his perspiring brow with a silk handkerchief. In all my years, nothing like it. Justice Finch's gaze drifted from the body to the faces of the others. There was Beatrice Vanderbilt Wynne, the club's unofficial queen, a woman whose lineage was as long and impeccable as her string of pearls. Her face was a mask of aristocratic disdain, though her eyes, like chips of ice, betrayed a flicker of something else. Fear, or was it triumph? She had made no secret of her loathing for Silas Blackwood, whose very presence she considered a stain upon the club's honour. Standing slightly apart was the formidable General Montgomery Davies, A man whose posture was so ramrod straight one suspected he slept at attention. His jaw was clenched so tightly, it seemed in danger of cracking his teeth. His wife, Clara, a faded, nervous woman, was rumoured to have found Mr. Blackwood's boorish charms rather more appealing than her husband's rigid propriety. An affair, the whispers said. Ah, the eternal triangle. It has been responsible for more untidy ends than all the wars in history. And then there was the widow. Evelyn Blackwood, Silas's wife of less than a year, was a creature of breathtaking, almost tragic beauty. She was 2 decades his junior, a porcelain doll he had acquired along with his other treasures. She wept, but her sobs were delicate, almost performative, as if she were conscious of the pretty picture she made, her grief framed by the tempestuous sky. One must always be wary of a sorrow that is too picturesque. The police have been called, of course, Justice Finch asked, his voice calm and measured, a point of stillness in the rising storm. Marcus Thorne, the club manager, answered. He was a handsome man in a quiet, efficient way, the sort who becomes part of the furniture until you realise he has seen and heard everything. The lines are dead, sir. We're cut off, completely. The wind howled, rattling the clubhouse windows, and a fresh sheet of rain lashed down. Trapped, all of them. With a victim they all had reason to despise, and a murderer who, at this very moment, was standing amongst them, breathing the same storm-tossed air, perhaps even feigning the same shock. Justice Finch adjusted his spectacles. A closed circle of suspects, a setting sealed by an act of God, and a secret buried somewhere beneath layers of wealth and etiquette. It was, he had to admit, a most intriguing little puzzle. The human heart, he mused, is a far more dangerous place than any hurricane-swept golf course. Chapter 2. The body of Silas Blackwood was moved, with as much dignity as could be mustered under the circumstances, to the club's chilled wine cellar. It seemed a fittingly ironic resting place for a man whose tastes had always run towards the ostentatious and overpriced. The rest of the unwilling party retreated to the Grand Lounge, a room designed for quiet conversation and discreet cocktails, which now felt more like a cage. The lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that turned familiar faces into grotesque masks. The hurricane raged, its voice a constant, mournful shriek. Justice Finch had, by some unspoken consensus, taken charge. He was not a policeman, he had been quick to point out, but in the absence of any official authority, a mind trained in the rigorous logic of the law was a comfort to the innocent and, he hoped, a terror to the guilty. He sat in a high-backed leather armchair, his fingertips steepled, his sharp eyes missing nothing. "Let us," he began, his voice cutting through the nervous chatter, "establish a timeline. It is always best to begin with the unarguable facts. We can proceed to the more malleable realm of human testimony thereafter." According to Marcus Thorne, the manager, Silas Blackwood, had stormed out of the clubhouse at approximately 3 o'clock, after a heated argument on the telephone. He had taken a golf cart and headed for the back nine, ostensibly to practice his swing, though his temper seemed ill-suited for a game requiring such precision. Dr. Pendleton, after a brief and unsettling examination, placed the time of death between 3:30 and 4:30. The body was discovered by a groundskeeper just before 5, as he was making his final rounds to secure the course against the oncoming storm. And where was everyone during this crucial hour? Finch's gaze swept the room. The alibis, my dear reader, tumbled out as they always do, a messy, contradictory patchwork of self-preservation. Beatrice Vanderbilt-Twin claimed she had been in the ladies' card room, engaged in a rather tiresome game of bridge with 3 other matrons. "We all saw Silas leave," she declared, her voice crisp. "He was in a dreadful state." Quite common, the man had no control over his baser instincts. Her partners, when summoned, corroborated her story, though they seemed more terrified of Mrs. Vanderbilt-Twin than any murderer. General Davies stated that he had been in the club's gymnasium, punishing a punching bag with military fervour. "Needed to blow off some steam," he grunted, pointedly not looking at his wife. No one could confirm his whereabouts. The gymnasium was, at that hour, deserted. An alibi without a witness is little more than a hopeful assertion. Evelyn Blackwood, the grieving widow, claimed she had retired to the library with a book. "The Great Gatsby," she'd said, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. I felt a need for something tragic and beautiful. A lovely sentiment. It was a shame, then, that when Justice Finch had discreetly checked the library a short while later, the copy of that particular novel was nestled on its shelf, coated in a thin, undisturbed layer of dust. A small lie, perhaps, but small lies are the threads from which great deceptions are woven. Dr. Pendleton, our nervous host, had been in his small office off the main lobby, attending to paperwork. Again, a solitary alibi. He had access, of course, to a veritable pharmacopoeia of interesting substances in his medical bag, but the wound on Silas's head was the result of brute force, not subtle chemistry. Or so it appeared. One must never take the obvious for the truth. Marcus Thorne had been everywhere, a whirlwind of efficiency, directing staff, securing windows, and generally preparing for the siege of Hurricane Isadora. His alibi was simultaneously the strongest and the weakest. He had been seen by dozens of people, but only for fleeting moments. No one could account for his location for more than 5 minutes at a time. Justice Finch allowed the silence to stretch, letting the weight of suspicion settle upon them all. "The weapon," he said finally, "was anything found near Mr. Blackwood's body?" Thorne cleared his throat. "No, sir. The police, when they can get here, will conduct a proper search, of course, but at a glance there was nothing. No golf club, no stone, nothing out of place. Except for the deceased, of course," Finch murmured dryly. "Tell me, Mrs. Vanderbilt Wynne, you were a vocal opponent of Mr. Blackwood's membership. You believed he lowered the tone of the club." Beatrice drew herself up. "I believe in maintaining standards, Justice Finch. A concept Mr. Blackwood found entirely foreign. He was a bully and a cheat in business and in life. He threatened the very foundations of this club. That does not mean I wished him dead. We are a civilized people." Civilized people, Finch thought, have been killing each other with great enthusiasm since the dawn of time. He turned his attention to the general. "General Davies, it was common knowledge that Mr. Blackwood was paying a great deal of attention to your wife." The general's face turned the colour of claret. "My wife's affairs are my own. Blackwood was a scoundrel. He got what he deserved. That's all I have to say on the matter. It was a confession of motive, if not of deed. But the obvious motive is often the most effective camouflage for the real one." The investigation, if one could call it that, proceeded in fits and starts as the afternoon bled into a long, terrifying night. The lights died for good shortly after 8, plunging the clubhouse into a primeval darkness broken only by emergency lanterns and flickering candles. Every creak of the old building, every rattle of a window pane, sent fresh waves of fear through the assembled suspects. It was during a brief lull in the storm, around midnight, that Justice Finch made his first significant discovery. He had taken a lantern to revisit the scene of the crime, or as close as he dared go in the tempest. Tucked into the damp grass, nearly invisible against the pristine white of a sand trap, was a single golf glove. It was white, made of the finest kid leather, and utterly immaculate. It was also a left-handed glove, and far too small for a man of Silas Blackwood's meaty proportions. He recalled from his brief observations of the man that Blackwood, like most golfers, was right-handed, and more importantly, never wore a glove at all, priding himself on his calloused, manly grip. He picked it up carefully with a handkerchief. Someone had been at the scene, someone who was careful, someone who wore a glove to keep their hands clean or perhaps to avoid leaving any trace of their presence. Someone who, in a moment of haste, had dropped it. He returned to the lounge, the glove safely in his pocket. He found the room in a state of heightened tension. Evelyn Blackwood was claiming to have seen a face peering in at her through one of the large windows overlooking the terrace. "It was horrible," she cried, clinging to Marcus Thorne's arm. Just for a second, a pale face in the dark. The general snorted. Nonsense, hysteria, no one can be out in this. But were they all accounted for? A quick, frantic head count confirmed they were. All 7 of them, Finch, Pendleton, Thorne, the General, Evelyn and Beatrice, Clara Davies had taken to her room with a headache hours before, were present. Perhaps it was a trick of the light, my dear, Dr. Pendleton said soothingly, though his own hand trembled as he poured a brandy. Justice Finch looked from the frightened face of the widow to the stoic masks of the others. A face in the window, a pristine white glove, a book that was never read, a man who deserved to be dead. The pieces were all there, scattered on the board. The little grey cells began to arrange them, searching for the pattern, for the single, elegant line of logic that would lead to the truth. The game, as they say, was afoot. Chapter 3. The morning after a murder possesses a unique and terrible quality. The world, having witnessed a fundamental violation of its order, tries to pretend that nothing has changed. At Elysian Fields, a weak, watery sun broke through the tattered remains of the hurricane's clouds, illuminating a scene of genteel devastation. Fallen palm fronds littered the fairways like giant, skeletal fingers, and the water hazards had swollen into murky lakes. The atmosphere inside the clubhouse was even more ravaged. Sleep had been a fugitive luxury, and the faces gathered in the lounge for a makeshift breakfast of coffee and dry toast were pale and etched with suspicion. Justice Finch had spent the pre-dawn hours in quiet contemplation, reviewing the facts as he knew them. The hurricane had provided the perfect, locked room, but the true walls were those of secrecy and shared animosity. Silas Blackwood had not been murdered by a stranger battling the storm. He had been killed by one of their own. His first port of call was the victim's locker. Marcus Thorne, after some persuasion, produced a master key. Blackwood's locker was as untidy as his personality. Amidst a jumble of garish golf shoes and half-empty boxes of monstrously large cigars, Finch found a leather-bound ledger. It was not a record of his golf scores. It was a meticulously detailed account of debts, favours and indiscretions. A blackmailer's Bible. He scanned the pages. Dr. Pendleton's name was there, next to a series of staggering figures that spoke of a gambling addiction far more serious than anyone suspected. The General's name was there too, but not in relation to his wife's infidelity. The entry was cryptic. Davies, the Santiago matter. Most damning of all was an entry that implicated not just one person but a group. It referred to something called the Mangrove Creek Fund, a land development deal from a decade prior that had gone spectacularly bust, ruining several smaller investors. Yet next to this entry, Blackwood had listed several names, including Beatrice Vanderbilt Wynne and General Davies, with notes on suspiciously timed and highly profitable stock trades made just before the fund's collapse. Ah, but my dear reader, the truth is often a matter of finance, so much more compelling than passion. Passion is a fire that burns hot and fast, but greed is a slow, corrosive acid. Blackwood hadn't just uncovered a secret, he had stumbled upon a conspiracy. He was planning to bleed them dry or expose them, and either option would have meant the utter ruin of their reputations and fortunes. Armed with this new knowledge, Finch began a series of quiet, individual conversations, his method one of gentle inquiry that felt more like a chat than an interrogation. He began with Evelyn Blackwood. He found her staring out at the ravaged golf course, a solitary, beautiful figure. "Your husband kept a detailed ledger, Mrs. Blackwood," Finch began softly. She did not seem surprised. Silas kept records of everything. He trusted no one. He said it was the only way to be sure people behaved themselves. "A cynical worldview," Finch observed. "Silas was a cynical man," she replied, a bitter edge to her voice. "He bought me, you know, like he bought this membership. He thought everything had a price." Finch then produced the small white glove he had found. "Have you ever seen this before?" Evelyn glanced at it and shook her head. "No, it's not mine." "My hands are much smaller." She held up her own to demonstrate. They were indeed slender and delicate. Next, he sought out General Davies, whom he found in the billiards room, methodically practicing shots as if to impose order on a chaotic world. Finch broached the subject of the Santiago matter. The general's composure for the first time cracked, the billiard cue stilled in his hands. "That was a long time ago," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "A military operation. Classified, one which Mr. Blackwood apparently felt was not, shall we say, conducted entirely by the book," Finch pressed gently. "One that, if revealed, might tarnish a distinguished career." The general's knuckles were white. "Blackwood was a bottom feeder, trafficking in rumour and filth. He threatened me, I will not deny it. I told him if he printed a word of it I would deal with him. A threat. Another motive layered on top of the first. The general was becoming a veritable treasure trove of reasons to commit murder. Perhaps too many. A killer rarely has the luxury of multiple, excellent motives. His conversation with Beatrice Vanderbilt Twin was the most challenging. She received him in a private sunroom, seated as regally as if on a throne. She listened to his questions about the Mangrove Creek Fund with an expression of mild boredom. "Old business, Justice Finch," she said with a wave of her elegant hand. "The world of finance is so volatile. Fortunes are made and lost. It is the way of things. But some fortunes, it would seem, were made on the misfortune of others. Insider trading, I believe, is the modern term. A rather serious crime." Beatrice's eyes narrowed. Mr. Blackwood was a crude man with a crude imagination. He saw conspiracy in every shadow. He was attempting to blackmail me and several other esteemed members of this club. We were, of course, treating his absurd allegations with the contempt they deserved. It was during this conversation that Finch noticed a small, ornate pin on her dress, a tiny, enamelled golfer mid-swing. It was a tasteful, exclusive piece of jewellery from the club's pro shop, and it was missing its backing. He moved on to Dr. Pendleton, who was nervously tidying his office, arranging vials and bottles that were already perfectly aligned. When confronted with the ledger, the doctor all but collapsed into his chair. I have a problem, Justice," he confessed, his voice a whisper. "The ponies, I got in too deep. Sealers, he bylaid me out, but the interest he charged was astronomical. He owned me. He was going to have me struck off, ruined, if I didn't pay him back by the end of the month. He buried his face in his hands. But I didn't kill him, I swear it. I'm a physician. I save lives." As Finch left the doctor's office, he almost bumped into Marcus Thorne, who was carrying a fresh box of candles. The manager's face was a mask of calm efficiency, but Finch could see the strain around his eyes. "A difficult night, Mr. Thorne," Finch commented. "The most difficult of my career, sir. You knew Mr. Blackwood well. I knew him as well as I know all the members. I make it my business to understand their needs, their habits. And their secrets." A flicker of something, was it anger, crossed Thorne's face before it was replaced by his usual impassive mask. "I am a club manager, Justice Finch, not a confessor." Finch retreated to the lounge, the threads of the mystery tangling in his mind. Motives abounded. Everyone had a secret Blackwood had threatened to expose. Beatrice and the general were tied to a financial conspiracy. The general had a potential military scandal. The doctor was in financial ruin. Even the quiet manager seemed to be hiding something. He sat down and considered the physical clues. A glove that fit no one. A lie about a book. A missing pin back. He then recalled something from Dr. Pendleton's initial, cursory examination of the body. The doctor had mentioned being surprised at the lack of blood from the head wound, given its severity. At the time, he'd put it down to the rain washing it away. But what if there was another reason? And then there was the faintest of odours Dr. Pendleton had noted, an almost imperceptible scent of bitter almonds around Blackwood's mouth, dismissed as being from the almond liqueur Blackwood sometimes drank. Cyanide, the classic poison, but the cause of death was a blow to the head, a contradiction, and in contradictions, my dear reader, lies the key. One must always question the very premise. What if the blow to the head was not the cause of death at all? What if it was merely the final, brutal punctuation mark to a sentence that had already been written in poison? The little grey cells buzzed with activity. A new theory began to form, audacious and terrible. A theory that involved not one murderer but many. A conspiracy not of finance but of murder itself. Chapter 4. The storm outside had passed, but the one inside the Elysian Fields Country Club was reaching its zenith. The air was thick with a paranoia so tangible one could almost taste it. Every shared glance was an accusation, every whispered word a potential condemnation. The veneer of civility, already cracked, was beginning to crumble entirely. The breaking point came in the late afternoon. A scream echoed from the second-floor hallway, a thin, piercing shriek that cut through the oppressive silence. The group, drawn by the sound, rushed to find Evelyn Blackwood collapsed near the door to her suite, her hand pressed to her throat, her eyes wide with terror. Marcus Thorne was kneeling beside her, attempting to comfort her. "He was here," she gasped, pointing a trembling finger at the end of the corridor. "In the shadows, he pushed me. He tried to hurt me." General Davies and Dr. Pendleton rushed to the end of the hall, but it was empty. A window leading to a small balcony was ajar, the curtains billowing in the damp breeze. "Did you see who it was?" Justice Finch asked, his voice sharp and focused as he helped the young woman to her feet. "No, it was too dark." "Just a shape, a man," she sobbed, burying her face in Thorne's shoulder. The incident shattered the last vestiges of calm. Accusations flew like poisoned darts. The general was convinced it was the doctor, a desperate man, capable of anything. Beatrice Vanderbilt Twin suggested the general's own violent temper was to blame. Everyone, it seemed, was a suspect in this new assault, which only served to deepen the mystery of the first. But Justice Finch was not looking at the frightened widow or the arguing suspects. He was looking at the floor. The carpet in the hallway was still damp from the storm, and there were faint, muddy footprints near the balcony window. But near where Evelyn had fallen, the carpet was pristine. There was no sign of a scuffle, no overturned furniture, nothing to suggest a violent struggle. It was all, he noted with a surge of intellectual clarity, a little too tidy. The attack felt staged, a piece of theatre designed to elicit a specific reaction. But why? He knew then that the time for quiet contemplation was over. The puzzle was complete, all the pieces were on the board. It was time for the reveal. He requested that everyone assemble in the grand lounge after dinner. A fire had been lit in the great stone hearth, casting a warm, deceptive glow over the room. It felt once again like a civilized place, a backdrop for a rational discussion. But what Finch was about to unleash was anything but. He stood before the fireplace, a commanding yet unassuming figure. The 7 other people in the room, the 8 if you counted the ghost of Silas Blackwood, watched him, their faces a mixture of fear and anticipation. "We find ourselves in a most unfortunate position," he began, his voice calm and resonant. "We are trapped here with a murderer in our midst. The official authorities will, no doubt, arrive tomorrow when the roads are clear. They will conduct their investigation. But I believe the truth of this affair can be found right here in this room. It is a truth built not on a single act, but on a collective one. We are not looking for a murderer. We are looking for a conspiracy." A nervous murmur went through the room. "Let us review the clues," he continued, beginning to pace slowly. First, a single, immaculate white glove was found near the body. A lady's glove for the left hand. None of our ladies present have claimed it. He glanced at Beatrice and Evelyn. Second, the victim appeared to have died from a blow to the head. Yet Dr. Pendleton noted the surprising lack of blood and a faint, almost imperceptible smell of bitter almonds on the deceased's lips, an odor consistent with cyanide. Dr. Pendleton shifted uncomfortably. "I thought it was his liqueur." "Precisely what you were meant to think," Finch said. "The cause of death was not the blow. The blow was an afterthought, a brutal piece of misdirection to conceal the far more subtle and skillful work of a poisoner. Mr. Blackwood was already dead or dying when his head was struck." He paused, letting the implication sink in. The question then is, how was the poison administered? Blackwood was alone. He hadn't eaten or had a drink from the clubhouse bar, but he did have one constant companion, his cigars. He turned to Marcus Thorne. "Mr. Thorne, you told me you make it your business to know the members' habits." Blackwood smoked a particularly large and expensive brand, did he not, kept in his locker? Thorne nodded numbly. "Yes, the Corona Imperial." "A cigar," Finch mused, "can be a most effective delivery system for certain contact poisons. A poison that could be absorbed through the lips and mouth. A fast-acting poison that would leave its victim disoriented, weak, and unable to fight back before unconsciousness set in. The perfect weapon for a murder that requires a certain detachment." He walked towards Beatrice Vanderbilt Wynne, whose face had become a rigid, impassive mask. Such a method would require careful handling. One would not wish to contaminate oneself. One might, for instance, wear a glove. A single glove would be sufficient to handle the cigar while doctoring it. A glove that might be dropped in the haste of retreat after ensuring the victim had taken the bait. He stopped directly in front of her, and one might need to signal to one's co-conspirators that the deed was done. Perhaps with a small, discreet gesture, such as removing a pin from one's dress, a pin whose backing is then lost in a moment of agitated triumph. He looked pointedly at the small, backless pin on her lapel. Beatrice did not flinch. "This is an outrageous fantasy." "Is it?" Finch countered. "You, Mrs. Vanderbilt Wynne, were the leader of this conspiracy. Blackwood's blackmail threatened to undo your entire world, to expose the sordid secret of the Mangrove Creek Fund that enriched you and the General at the expense of others. You could not allow that. You decided that Silas Blackwood had to be permanently silenced." He turned to the General. "But you needed help, you needed muscle. General Davies, you were also being blackmailed over the fund and over a past military indiscretion. You provided the physical element, you followed Blackwood. After the poison had done its work and he had collapsed, you delivered the blow to his head with a golf club. Confessing, in a way, to a crime of passion, you did not commit to mask the cold-blooded execution that truly occurred. It was you who planted your own tie pin nearby, a clever red herring to suggest a struggle that never happened." The General stood ramrod straight, his face ashen. "Lies." "And you needed a medical expert," Finch continued, his gaze falling on the trembling Dr. Pendleton. "Someone to manage the aftermath. To pronounce the death, to steer any initial inquiry towards the obvious head wound and away from the subtle signs of poison. Your debts to Blackwood made you vulnerable, Doctor. You were coerced into joining this enterprise." The doctor let out a small, strangled sob. "The plan was almost perfect," Finch said, his voice softening slightly. "But it was a conspiracy, and conspiracies are fragile things, held together by the weakest link. The three of you planned and executed the murder of Silas Blackwood. Mrs. Vanderbilt Wynne provided the means and the motive. The General provided the force, and the doctor provided the cover." Silence descended upon the room, thick and suffocating. The fire crackled in the hearth, a lonely, living sound in a room full of ghosts. "But there is one more thread to this tangled web," Justice Finch said, turning his piercing gaze upon Evelyn Blackwood and Marcus Thorne, who stood close together. "The attack on you this afternoon, Mrs. Blackwood. It was a fabrication, was it not? A desperate attempt to cast you as a victim, to deflect any suspicion that might fall upon you, or more accurately upon your lover." Evelyn gasped. Thorne put a protective arm around her. "Your alibi for the time of the murder was that you were reading in the library. A lie. Where were you, Mrs. Blackwood? I suggest you were with Mr. Thorne. You knew your husband was a monster. You knew these people had reason to hate him. You didn't participate in the murder, but you suspected it. And when you realized an investigation was underway, you and Mr. Thorne staged that little drama in the hallway to ensure you were both seen as nothing more than a victim and her protector." Marcus Thorne stepped forward, his composure finally breaking. "Leave her out of this. She knew nothing. I suspected something was afoot. I saw Mrs. Vanderbilt Wynne near Blackwood's locker yesterday." I saw the general follow him out to the course. I didn't know what they were planning, not until it was too late. My only concern was protecting Evelyn. By perpetrating a fraud, Finch asked coolly. Beatrice Vanderbilt Wynne finally spoke, her voice like the chipping of ice. He was a parasite, Justice, a vulgar little tick who was going to destroy lives, good, respectable lives, for his own sport and profit. What we did was not murder. It was sanitation. The general nodded grimly. A necessary evil, I regret nothing. Dr. Pendleton simply wept, a broken man. The confession, when it came, was not a torrent, but a cold, defiant statement of purpose. They admitted it all, their pact sealed by mutual self-interest and a shared, aristocratic contempt for their victim. They saw themselves not as criminals, but as guardians of their world, preserving order by any means necessary. Chapter 5. As the first true light of morning crested the horizon, it brought with it the distant, reassuring sound of sirens. The world was reconnecting itself to Elysian fields. Rescue and justice was on its way. The conspirators sat in a defeated silence. The fire had died down to embers, much like the defiant rage that had fueled their crime. Beatrice Vanderbilt Wynne stared into the ashes, her face a tragic mask of pride and ruin. The general stood by the window, his back to the room, a statue of disgraced honor. Dr. Pendleton was a crumpled heap in his chair, the full weight of his actions having finally crushed him. Justice Alastair Finch watched them, a profound sense of melancholy settling upon him. He had solved the puzzle, untangled the knot of lies and deceit. The little grey cells had performed their function. But there was no triumph in it, only a deep and weary sadness for the darkness that lurked within the human heart. These were not monsters. They were people of privilege and standing who had convinced themselves that their own preservation was more important than a human life, even one as unpleasant as Silas Blackwood's. Evelyn Blackwood and Marcus Thorne stood apart, their own lesser deception exposed. They were not murderers, but their actions had muddied the waters, their lies born of fear and a desperate, fledgling love. They would have to answer for that, but their fate would be far different from the others. Ah, but my dear reader, every story must have its end, and every crime its reckoning. The police arrived, and the elegant, manicured world of the Elysian Fields Country Club was irrevocably shattered. The tale of the conspiracy at the country club would become a sordid local legend, a cautionary tale whispered over cocktails for years to come. The illusion of civilized tranquility had been stripped away, revealing the raw, desperate passions beneath. It is a story I have seen play out time and again, in country manors and exotic locales, among the rich and the poor. For a country club, in the end, is no different from a sealed room on a snowbound train or an isolated island. It is merely a stage, and on it men and women will play out the eternal, tragic drama of human nature, with its infinite capacity for both grace and wickedness. One must always be watching, you see. The clues to the darkness are always there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the patient observer to piece them together. Always.